again, everybody. Lance Russell and Dave Brown right along ringside. By golly, we're about ready to go with more big action.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Georgia Championship Wrestling. I'm Gordon Slowly, your host, and we have quite an hour in store for us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Championship Wrestling at ringside. This is Vince McMahon, along with wrestling's only living legend, Bruno Sammartino.
Welcome to this week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, another outstanding card.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories. I am Ray Russell, and this week we head back. We're going back to Cali one more time. In order to do that properly, we must bring back onto the show the one and only Kurt Brown, a.k.a. Vandal Drummond. Welcome back to Regional Wrestling.
And thank you for having me again.
Oh my
One
God,
of the things I always love about this podcast is you drop some names that a few I've never heard of, but most I haven't even thought of in years, and it's such a trip down memory lane. I enjoy it quite a bit.
Yeah, as do I. Unfortunately, I get scared when we name drop things here because people have a tendency to die, right? I believe you mentioned Dennis the Menace, and then somebody pointed out that last time we dropped the show, within days, was it Jay North was his name? I can't remember.
Oh, my God. Was this my reference to Johnny Legend seeing Jay North frequent the Olympic Auditorium and asking him to be a member of the Freddie Blassie fan club or the spokesperson?
I didn't know that. No, that's interesting. No, we were talking about random Cowboy Tom is how it came up. You said it sounded like a character on Dennis the Menace, like a television program. Yes.
Yes.
And then
Cowboy Bob was Dennis the Menace's hero. That's right. That's right. I was such a huge Dennis the Menace fan back in the day.
Yeah.
No, Johnny and was it Jeff Walton or somebody else? A few of them might be his friend Glenn Bray. They had the Freddie Blassie fan club, official, endorsed by Blassie himself. Mm-hmm. Johnny always said when he was a kid that Blassie was so nice to anybody who had an interest in him. They'd follow him and find him, sunning on the beach and come and ask him all sorts of silly questions. And he said Blassie never shunned them. He was always very nice to them. But Dennis the Menace was a huge Freddie Blassie fan.
Really? Okay.
And yeah, he was a frequent flyer at the Olympic Auditorium when he was, I think, 13 or 14, something like that. So Johnny and either Jeff or Glenn went up to him and said, "We'd like you to be like a spokesperson for the Freddie Blassie fan club, kind of be the mascot. Would you be interested?" And they said he smiled and just said something bizarre like, "I love Freddie Blassie," and then he just walked away. Johnny and his friend looked at each other and said, "Well, that sounds like a yes, doesn't it?" So they made him like I think it was like honorary president or something like that. And they got all sorts of fan mail from little girls who loved Dennis the Menace and were hoping to make a connection with Jay North. So they would write back to these girls as Jay North and make him sound like he was a bit challenged. Like, "I are great Fred Blassie fan, and if you like me, I have many photo to sell you. You can buy one for $1, or if you want 3, it will cost you $1 plus $1 plus $1.
Was Dennis the Menace a robot? I'm not really sure what to make of all of that. very, very intriguing.
Yeah.
Was he the bionic Dennis the Menace, maybe? Maybe he was booked out of LeBell territory?
That was a very Johnny Legend thing to do,
Yeah.
Yeah, no rules apply when it comes to Johnny. Anything goes.
Well, interesting.
Especially if it's strange.
I bet everybody out there tuning in for early 80s LA did not think we would be referencing Jay North at the top of the program. But yeah, within days of the last show dropping, one of the listeners, and I wish I could remember who it was so I could give him a shout out here, but they pointed out the legend of Vandal strikes again, because we talk about it. Everybody we talk, so-and-so just passed away last week. And here we go. We talk about, just briefly mentioned Dennis the Menace on the last episode, and poof, and sadly, Jay North passes away within days of our podcast. So please be careful who you mention this week, Vandal. That's all I'm trying to get at.
The sorcerer is back.
Keep my name out of your mouth. How about that? Let's
Who shall I put the hex on this time?
Can't wait to find out.
I was a huge Dennis the Menace fan like a year before I was infatuated with pro wrestling.
Okay.
I just binge watched reruns of Dennis the Menace. I loved that show.
Yeah, it was on, it was on Nick at Night, and it was on Weekend Nickelodeon in the 80s when I was a kid. So I saw quite a bit of the Dennis the Menace show, obviously years after it was on the air, but I still enjoyed it even back then. So I'm familiar with the show, definitely, and the two different Mr. Wilsons, George and whomever followed.
Yes. They were both wonderful. I thought it was actually a very charming relationship Dennis and Mr. Wilson had. He drives them crazy, but they were still his road dog. He would not turn Dennis away.
Still a little strange that the husband of Mrs. Wilson leaves and enter his brother. I mean, I don't know. That was kind of creepy, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, Joseph Kearns died unexpectedly, and they just they tagged out, brought his brother in, and
sure, why not? Right?
Yeah, go figure.
Well, I'm sure everybody's like, wow, I didn't know I was going to get a lesson in television. Dennis the Menace, for that matter. Hey, I like the cartoon from the 80s as well, guys, but we're going to go back to the early 80s in L.A. once again. And Vandal, I appreciate you so much. I wanted to mention this at the top of the show. After our last show dropped, I got a DM on Facebook from Scott Walton, the son of Jeff Walton, who we've talked about here for the last couple of episodes, talked about how huge Jeff was in playing a part in keeping the LeBell territory going behind the scenes and on the screen. Jack of all trades. And Scott's, said that, he'd spoken with you in the past as well. And he turned me on to his father, Jeff. Jeff actually emailed me, and he just, basically stated he wanted to put you over in the regards of that, he finds you to be a Lucha Libre expert. And, obviously, we've talked about you being a super fan here of this, and a lot of these guys. You can share stories, personal stories about a lot of these guys, as well as your memories as a fan and going and taking photographs and things of that nature. But Jeff also said that, if you need anything, if you have any questions, contact me and I can tell you, business stories and things of that nature. So after we finish up our deal, Jeff, if you're listening again, we appreciate you listening. And I would love to have him on the show, or I would love to pick your brain, Jeff, and get any information we can from the business side to kind of put a bow on this thing. So we're going to look at it from our point of view as fans and what Vandal. But after that, I would love to get some insight from Jeff as well.
Take him up on that. Jeff was there. Jeff went from being a fan to it being a business, and I can't say enough about what a nice guy he has always been to me, and to fans in general. And if he is listening, another thank you, Jeff. He's a wonderful guy. His son Scott is a really wonderful person too.
Yeah, so I just wanted to put that out there. I didn't even mention that to you until now. I'd completely forgotten to bring that up to you off air. But yeah, so I just wanted to put that out there. Thanks to Scott for passing it along, passing the show along.
Said that.
Scott passed along the information to Jeff, and I was, shocked to hear that Jeff was interested enough that he did go back and listen. And we certainly do appreciate you, listening, Jeff. And if you are, please, if we say anything that's incorrect here, because I'm getting most of my information, not just from the message boards, from guys who were there, the old kayfabe boards and things of that nature, but also through Rock Rim's book, as well as Jeff's book. So hopefully most of this information is accurate. However, at the same time, you being a super fan at the time, I definitely wanted to pick your brain and get your memories from your point of view. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue that this week. And boy, do we have some doozies to get into. Vandal.
I think I have a more than average memory for dates and who was good, who was decent, who wasn't, yada, yada. But I get stuff wrong too. So I always welcome somebody else's input if I say something incorrect.
Well, before we get into some of the fun names here this week, I did want to mention, because we kind of glossed over it because we were moving into the fall of 1980. Back in August of 1980, we talked about, you mentioned many years earlier, back in the mid-'70s, that Los Angeles, the LeBell territory, they lost their English-speaking TV over at KCOP, and they would eventually move over to English-language TV channel 52, and that's what they were airing on by this point. But in August of 1980, they lose their English language channel 52 as well. And so now they're completely without, English speaking version of the Los Angeles territory, which you have to imagine is extremely detrimental.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not one of the big fans of saying what if, thinking of hypothetical things that could have happened. But I wonder what would have happened if, when they had the Spanish TV, if they, put a lot more effort into marketing towards the Latino fans. But if they really, really pushed it, I wonder if the territory would have wound up a little different. Who knows?
Well, we see how big of a star Mil Mascaras is. Even Dos Caras comes through here. Blue Demon we've seen. But I get what you're saying, and it always appeared like LeBell was just in there to make money. And I'm not saying that every promoter is not, but I mean, it felt like LeBell himself, Mike LeBell, didn't really have a grasp on pro wrestling. He was there as a businessman more so, the box office guy, if you will.
Yes.
So he would constantly use these.
And I would love Jeff's
bookers.
Input on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd love to know Jeff's input on that, because I remember when Mike LeBell passed away, Art Williams, who is an unsung hero of LA wrestling, worked in the office for years. In fact, if you get Jeff on here, I request that you dedicate a good portion of an episode. I humbly request you a part of an episode on Art Williams, because he is a guy with an amazing memory and was somebody, Jeff will tell you, he helped Jeff out a lot in the early days. In the Wrestling Observer, Art Williams just straight out said he was a bad promoter who got lucky. I don't know if I'd go that far, but it did seem like, he was a businessman, and perhaps if he really kind of studied the business of wrestling rather than just trying to make money right away, that maybe he could have gone even further. And I would love to know what Jeff's input is on that, what his viewpoint is.
Yeah, I was reading some comments from some of the wrestlers from that time that have made certain statements and things back in the day on interviews, shoot interviews, things of that nature, and their consensus was that Mike really had no idea anything about the wrestling business, but he was running the wrestling business, to make the money, so he would constantly have bookers come in, and that was not unusual, but typically the guy promoting the show still had some idea of what pro wrestling was and what you needed out of it, so they can kind of see what the booker was doing and either go along with it or maybe put the kibosh. Like Bill Watts would have absolutely said, we're not doing that, right? But Mike LeBell just kind of sat back and let the guys do what they wanted to do. And so it could be successful with maybe, say, Chavo or someone booking for however longer period of time. And then they move over to Tom Ernesto here, and things just don't seem to be clicking right now. And a lot of guys are blaming Tom. A lot of guys are blaming LeBell for not wanting to spend money, like you said, and using different talent and maybe moving on with the times. Like, well, okay, we lost English TV. I'm not saying I would do it necessarily, but it seems like, well, it makes sense. Okay, well, if we only have a Spanish-speaking show now, maybe we should start bringing in some more of the, the Hispanic population or the wrestlers, the luchadors, things of that nature. I'm not saying get rid of Tom Pritchard and these other guys. There's a room for everybody like that. Talent is talent. But I could see where, like you said, let's try something different here and see if it changes. Even if an extra 100 people show up, maybe we're onto something.
Especially since Mike LeBell was cognizant of what a draw Mascaras was. And if he kind of stuck his head in the book of wrestling a little more, maybe he would have taken a chance on giving a stronger push to a lot of the stars from Mexico, maybe even push the Mexican style a little more.
Right.
Who knows? In fact, I will say that's one of the few hypothetical questions that could it wouldn't keep me up at night, but I could almost do some fantasy booking. I'm not a big fan of fantasy booking, but I toy with the idea, because when they would bring in a lot of stars from Mexico, even in that final year in '82, they would have like an occasional super show where they would bring in the Villanos, Babyface, Luis Mariscal, number of guys from Mexico. And the audience definitely did go up on those shows. They did definitely draw more. Perro Aguayo, but it wasn't consistent.
Okay.
So I will always just kind of have a little question mark. What if they were a little more consistent?
Well, that's definitely a fun what if. You talked about, not being a fantasy booker, a fan of fantasy booking. That would be one thing that would intrigue me. That is a huge what if in the history of wrestling. What if they had just tried this? I mean, if you fail, you fail, but you're failing anyway, right? So what's it going to hurt?
Absolutely. That's a good way of putting it.
So business is down, and but some storylines had just come out. We talked about Ron Starr making the babyface turn, courtesy of John Tolis turning on his own partner. Clever booking there in that tag team cage match. But Starr's run here is coming to an end as well. He's going to leave by October of 1980 in an angle feuding with John Tolis. Tolis's right-hand man was the assassin, which is Tom Ernesto's son, Tom Ernesto Jr. under that hood. And the assassin, in this instance, going to fireball Ron Starr, send him out of the company, send him packing off to the next territory. So Ron Starr is gone. We got to build some new talent here. And in comes a guy by the name of Battleship Johnson, Danny Johnson, Bullwhip Johnson from Canada. For anybody curious to check him out, I'm sure there's a few matches I believe I saw on YouTube, but, I always remember him from popping in as a job guy in 1990 at Starrcade as part of Team Canada in the old Pat O'Connor Memorial Tag Team Tournament. But that was Bullwhip Johnson. He comes through here. He gets the TV title briefly. But you were in Portland, so you might have missed Bullwhip.
I did.
Okay.
Completely. I remember when I moved up there, Jeff Walton told me, be certain to send me your address. And I did. I was surprised that every week he sent me the Olympic Auditorium program. And I do remember that. I remember Battleship Johnson, seeing him mentioned in the program. I don't remember anything else, though. Maybe that's just, when I moved to Eugene, that's when I started indulging in a lot of cannabis and hashes. Probably 80% of the population of Eugene, Oregon did. And so maybe my memory's a little hazy. But, yeah, I don't even remember seeing pics of him. Or in my memory, he didn't stick around for long, but I could be wrong.
Well, I'm going to scroll through results. We'll find out here how long he sticks around, but I notice he pops up right after Ron Starr leaves, so I'm just saying that he replaced Ron Starr on the roster, and that just wasn't going to happen. I mean, it just didn't work out for the long term. But I also noticed back at the end of the summer, Tatsumi Fujinami making one of his trips here to the LA territory, wrestling Tom Pritchard. And Tom had went on his shoot interview, and he talked about that match, and he said, that match got me my first trip to Japan. Tom, when I go and I look myself, and sure enough, Pritchard is working for New Japan. So that worked out for him, to be able to work at the time, the junior heavyweight champ, the WWF junior heavyweight champion Fujinami coming to town to take on Pritchard. That had to be fun. Pritchard, a year in the business, not even a year in the business, and he's wrestling Tatsumi Fujinami. That had to be crazy.
That was a perk of working for Mike LeBell. Mike LeBell did have connections with New Japan. Mm-hmm. Another person, I didn't know this till today when I was just kind of, researching the year. In 81, Enforcer Luciano got a tour of New Japan, which really shocked me. And I assume that's because of his connection with Michael Bell. I was going to
say, talk about connections.
According to Wrestling Data, anyway, I don't know. I think we might have said before, Wrestling Data is a really good source, but you have to kind of do a little backup research because not everything they have is correct.
Right.
But it looks like that when he went to Japan, I think that was the last year Enforcer Luciano was in the biz.
Yeah, he disappeared somewhere here in the early 80s.
Yeah, I didn't realize he was a lot older than I thought he was. So that's a reasonable retirement time. And again, until I saw some of those Olympic tapes and the Mid-Atlantic tape, I really forgot Enforcer was really not good. I mean, really. You're being very
Am I being
polite.
Kind? Yes. Yes. No, you're being absolutely polite in that instance. One of the, I didn't know a whole lot about work rate. I knew what I liked and what I didn't like, growing up. But by the tape trading days of the 1990s, my first glimpse at Enforcer Luciano, even then I said, man, this guy sucks. How the hell is he working in these territories coming through Crockett? And I mean, obviously he didn't stay very long in some of these places once they got a glimpse of what they were dealing with. But he worked in Amarillo. There's a lot of ads with his picture on there. And that's how I even figured out that he was a character by the name of Nobel Price, a.k.a. Nobel Prize. I think that's what they were going for there down in the dying,
that's cute.
the dying days of Amarillo, though, when they really didn't have a lot of, it might have been, I can't remember the years. So it might have been after the Funk sold to Blackjack and Murdoch.
Also Guillotine Gordon
in
the early 70s. And I guess he even had it was called Evil Eye Valentine in one of the territories in the 60s. I mean, it's fascinating. When I just looked at his data, he got a lot of work, Maybe he was just a very agreeable person. Maybe he didn't make a fuss or something.
I've seen some enhancement talent that had better qualities than him. I just can't explain it, man. Of all of the footage that I've seen him, which isn't a whole lot, but of what I've seen of him, my biggest memory, and I think I touched on it last time, but I went back and watched it again. there's a clip of Bob Caudle in Crockett interviewing the newcomer Enforcer Luciano, and he comes out and presents Bob Caudle with a fish wrapped in a newspaper. And if anybody's ever seen the Godfather movie, Luca Brasi was sleeping with the fishes, and that's how they basically said, that's it. And Bob Caudle had clearly never seen the Godfather movie, and somebody should have prepped him before we do this promo here, because Bob Caudle is on air, just blank, like, I don't understand, what the fuck is this? There's a fish in a fucking, are you giving me a fish? Like, Bob was just, he had no idea what was going on in this segment. It's great.
That's hysterical. I came across a Mid-Atlantic promo he cut on Blackjack Mulligan, and even on the mic, that guy he was so unterrifying.
You didn't buy it when he was eating the light bulbs? I think he was eating light bulbs in one of the segments.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah, I guess.
Oh, if there is a segment, I'd like to see it. I'd like to see if it had any effect. I don't think it quite had the same effect as Moondog Mayne eating glass and swallowing goldfish.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, he was no Lonnie Mayne. That's for sure. There's not a lot of footage of Mayne out there either, but from what I've seen, leaps and bounds, much better than unfortunately Luciano. But that
Mayne was awesome. I do think that the fourth, if you were going to rewrite Dante's Inferno and gear it toward pop culture, I think the fourth level of hell would be watching Enforcer Luciano versus Walter Johnston in an Iron Man match twice.
Well, I'll have you know that there is a match featuring Ox Baker and Enforcer Luciano in tag team action. And this, I don't believe the footage exists, but I will continue to dig and hopefully something pops up. Wrestling against Walter Johnson and I believe Battleship Johnson. So it's not, it doesn't,
if you ever find it, please tell me. One of the few matches I found of him was Ox Baker and Luciano versus Mickey Doyle and Buddha Khan. So Mickey Doyle was the sole talented wrestler. Ox Baker, I can understand why he got over, but Mickey Doyle was the only truly strong worker in that match.
Well, Ox had that look, obviously. I mean, even as a kid, he was retired by the time I saw him. He was a manager on some of these. Even he came through WCW for like a few weeks in 1990, managing the Night Stalker, who would go on to be Atom Bomb and Wrath later in the 90s. But Ox Baker, I saw him in the AWA too near around that time frame as a manager. But even then I go, man, that guy's scary. And he was a big dude, but I just finished doing a show with Bob Roop and he explained a little bit about Ox and why he might not have been taken too good as a good worker, if you will, especially later in his career. Not that he ever really was accused of being a great worker, but Bob explained to me that Ox had extremely bad knees, and that's why he couldn't bump. That's why he more so fell into the ropes and took bumps by the ropes. His knees were so bad that he couldn't stand up without using the ropes, and so Ox tried to never take a bump in the middle of the ring because he would literally have to crawl or roll all the way to the ropes just to get back to his feet. So that was a little bit of an explanation. It's not the greatest explanation.
And my feeling is if you're not a good worker, but you're not hurting your opponent and you're getting over, power to you. So power to Ox.
Yeah. I mean, he was a hell of a character. He has a place, in wrestling history for me, just by looking at him. it's
I
funny.
Agree. When I was a kid, he scared me.
Yeah.
When I saw the magazine articles on him, he intimidated me.
Yeah,
then I saw him wrestle.
The man with like Satan's eyebrows,
now,
right? Like the horns on his eyebrows.
Satan's eyebrows. I think I said on the last episode, I should really take notes on what I've said because I tend to tell stories over and over about the San Bernardino appearance where after all this hype about him killing men in the ring, he's just clowning around and he's,
right. And he told you to take pictures. Yes. I remember that. Yeah.
Yes. That was a very special night.
I can imagine.
Well, he won my heart that night. He seemed like a really neat guy.
Yeah, that's a fun story. I'm glad you shared that with us last time around. I'm looking at names here. Now, this is we're going to go to the polar opposite of a Enforcer Luciano, another newcomer straight from England. He wasn't the gentleman yet, but Chris Adams debuts, and he's going to bring along a teenage Jeannie Clark with him. She's a teenager, but still legal by this point, so It's okay to look, guys. But Jeannie Clark would go on to, she would manage Steve Austin in the feud with Chris Adams and Tony Adams and down in Dallas around 1990 or so. I got to watch that on ESPN, so I watched Austin basically from the beginning, and I loved Chris Adams. I was a big fan of his. And later on, she would be Lady Blossom for a cup of coffee with Steve Austin in the WCW when they were married. But back here, just a young UK Chris Adams coming to the United States to I guess, to the promised land, trying to live that American dream.
Mm-hmm. Excellent wrestler, excellent babyface. And that's all I'll say about him.
Okay, well, that's pretty much we've heard the stories, especially when he's, under the influence of certain things. In fact, I read a Tom Pritchard comment that he had made about, you never knew what Chris you were going to get or how quickly his temper could flare up. I appreciate you being cordial here in regards to Chris Adams, but if there's any stories you do wish to share, we can always do it next time on the show or whatever the case may be. But Adams comes in and like you said, he was a hell of a worker. They pair him with Tom Pritchard for a period of time here. They give him pretty much every title belt under the sun, even though he'd only been in the business maybe 2-3 years at this point, and he was doing jobs. Now, he wasn't a job guy per se, but when they would stick him in the ring with the top talent over in the UK on the World of Sports show, Adams was usually the guy that did the job in those matches. But yeah. Chris comes here looking for a push, and a push he gets. He gets the TV title, he gets the tag titles with Tom Pritchard, and eventually he gets handed the America's title by Victor Rivera. Do you know this storyline?
That I do not know. I remember being home school break and saw Pritchard and Adams as a tag team. I thought they were a great babyface tag team.
Yeah, it sounds great.
But,
there's a little bit of it out there, but I mean, to have been able to watch that week to week, that would have been a hell of a tag team to get behind, the young fresh meat babyface team.
Yeah, I do wish I actually got to see it a little more. I did get to see Chris Adams quite a bit in shows like San Bernardino and when they ran Santa Ana for a while in '82. I got to see him live quite a bit, and he was a really good worker. Really, he probably could have been a lot more if he, had together. I hung out with him a few times. He was very charming. Let's put it that way. He was very charming, but
well, he was a gentleman to a point.
yes. Gentleman can also be a synonym for con man.
Well, we are in the wrestling business.
I've actually spoken about this on other podcasts before.
That's fine.
I'll let that one lie. I'll just, let it ride now.
Absolutely. So apparently there was a storyline or an angle or whatever you want to call this involving Chris Adams where he receives the America's Championship from Victor Rivera. Rivera forfeiting the title to Adams, stating that Rivera received a letter from his mother which brought him to tears, prompting him to change his cheating ways. Victor Rivera's mother not happy with the way he's healing here in L.A. She just caught on, I guess, and she was disappointed in Victor, so he turned babyface. They did this in Memphis years later with Tommy Rich. His mother actually comes to the TV studio, and Tommy basically turns face. Yes. And it's funny, I'd never heard this angle here in L.A. I don't know how it plays out after this. I'm going to have to keep doing some digging because this is as far as I got. But I thought it was a cheap way to turn the belt over without Rivera, who was, getting up there in age, just putting Adams over, right? I don't know if this was Victor going, I'm not doing it. I don't know if it's storyline driven. I don't know what the deal was.
You have me curious now because that same trip when I came out here from Eugene, in fact, it was the same night I saw Pritchard and Adams as a tag team. I'm going to say they were against the Davidson brothers, but I don't recall. But what I do remember was that was the night when Mike Masters won the America's title from
Mike Masters.
Victor Rivera. It was a really good match, too. Very solid match.
So that was one of those talents, Mike Masters. We'll get into him in a minute once you're finished with the story.
Yes. Now, also on that same evening, they had a loser-leave town that it was supposed to be Ox Baker versus Al Madrill. Madrill was leaving the territory.
Okay.
So what happened was...
You're already building it up, man.
Sorry. Oh, God. So Ox Baker walks out on the territory. Why, I don't know. But one of the signs that the promotion was really losing its production luster was they did all their interviews like weeks ahead. They would cut several interviews and, one interview would be for this Saturday, the next for the following Saturday. So you're pretty much booking storylines and results in these interviews. And if somebody walked out in the territory and an angle changed, they wouldn't go through to the trouble of
bringing the guys back in,
cutting the interview or restructuring it. So what happens is Mike Masters wins the America's title from Victor Rivera, and there's no Ox Baker. So Mike Masters comes out with his manager, Pete Collins, and wrestles a second match versus Al Madrill, and he runs Al Madrill out of town. The next day on TV, I want to say it was Tom Pritchard is in an interview saying, Ox Baker, I'm so angry at you for what you did to my friend Al Madrill, and now he's out of town, and I want you. And
wow. So that's
that
could be Trainwreck City.
It's funny just how major Trainwreck City. And such a weird, it wouldn't have taken that much effort just to change things up, just say, hey, cut this interview, and
well, that's definitely something to talk to Jeff Walton about. Why, if there was a specific reason, why was it just a Mike LeBell call? Yeah, I don't want to spend the money to bring the guys back in here and do this or whatnot. I don't know what the situation would have been, why they would have needed to record. I get it. Like, it's nice to get everything in the bag if you know what you're going to do, as long as we get to point A to point D and nothing changes in between. But if I record an interview with Ox Baker today and I said, all right, we're going to air this in a month when we get back to the Olympic and we do this, we finish the feud here. It's nice to record weekly, though, because the guy's there, right? And so if he decides to disappear in the middle.
So, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It's one thing I remember Jeff Walton telling me in an interview that Dan Farron and I did with him in the early 90s. And unfortunately, I kicked myself. I can't find that interview. I think it was toward the late 70s, mid to late 70s. He had some deal with Channel 34 where I think they owned the footage, and he got some sort of sweet kickback where he didn't have the rights to the footage himself, which is funny because he was selling bootleg videos a few years later of his own territory, even though he wasn't the ones who had the rights. And they weren't very good quality.
I might have read that in one of the books, when I was going over the notes, and I don't know if I have that somewhere in my notes, because I have like freaking 80 pages of notes here that I'm scrolling through with results mixed in. But
Jeff could tell you a lot better, but I'm wondering It could also be an issue. Maybe Channel 34, the Spanish International Network, perhaps they didn't want to go through the effort.
Oh, okay.
I would be curious, but
there may have been hoops to jump through.
Tell him Curdy asks him. I want to know, Mr. Walton.
Well, I'm going to make a list of questions, and I'll send them over to Jeff and see if he wants to answer them through email or come on the show. But either way, he's certainly invited, and I would love to get any information we can. Any digging we can do, that's what we're going to do. But right now, we're going to continue on, talk about another talent. You just brought him up. They bring Mike Masters in. They're going to give him a shot here, and he gets a shot in Portland as well, but he's going to get a shot here in L.A. at this point in time. Now, up to this point, I don't believe Mike had really gotten a push anywhere. He'd been a prelim guy working for the World Wrestling Federation over on the East Coast before coming over here. But then he gets thrown into the ocean, sink or swim, because he gets the America's title from Victor Rivera. I believe that happened sometime in March, but he's also working the likes of Dos Caras, Mil Mascaras here, I see in the results. And he even does a hair match with Mil at one point. So, it's a pretty big deal.
I think you could find that on YouTube.
Okay. I'll have to go looking for that one.
And, unfortunately, I was in Oregon most of that time, but I was around just long enough to see him. And one thing I will say for the LeBell territory, they would take somebody who was an enhancement talent in WWF, like SD Jones, give him a push, and you'd see them shine. And whether they were an okay worker or a great worker, I remember Butcher Brannigan technically being an okay worker, but I remember being a little kid and just thinking, God, this guy looks like one of the toughest son of a bitches I've ever seen. And I heard he was a very tough guy.
Okay.
And he was good on the mic. I almost wondered why some territories didn't give him, something beyond enhancement talent.
Right.
Maybe he didn't want it. I don't know. But he cut a good promo, and I dug watching him. FD Jones, and then Mike Masters, I would say, is one of the best examples of showing somebody whose talent was, I think, really underappreciated.
Yeah, they gave him a shot, and he ran with it here for in 1981 LA, that's for sure. And I think a lot of it is they can come in for cheap, right? These guys have never gotten pushes anywhere before. They're technically nobodies, if you will, in regards to the name value. They're not in the magazines, so I'm sure they're coming in at a steal for Mike LeBell and crew. But they're getting it done. Maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe Battleship Johnson doesn't necessarily work out, but maybe Mike Masters does, even for a short period of time. So, again, you keep throwing shit against the wall, some of it's going to stick. Not that I'm calling anybody shit, by the way, guys, before I get any crap thrown at me.
Yeah, and I don't recommend throwing shit against a wall.
Neither do I.
Trust me, it's a bitch to clean up. It is a bitch to clean up. And Mike Masters, I don't ever remember him being on the mic. I think Pete Collins did that, that part of the work.
Right.
But he was over. The girls loved him. I mean,
he was put together.
Yeah, he was. And I remember I was living back down here in L.A., but I did go up to visit some friends up in Oregon when he was wrestling there. And my friend Lloyd was good friends with Mike Masters. And, of course, I was going to get a bunch of Mike Masters picks for him. But what I'll never forget is, in the little arena in Eugene, I just had woman after woman say, "Are you taking pics of Mike Masters? Can I get some from you?" I mean,
wow, okay.
Yeah, he was a stud.
And he didn't get a penny of those proceeds, did he, Vandal? Oh.
Absolutely not. I'm following the Mike LeBell playbook and payoffs. Or that might be a little unfair. Let's go Nick Goulas.
Okay, Nick Goulas sounds more fair. All right, so we do the hair match, though. Mike Masters, I mean, I don't know what he made for that, but you have to imagine you're getting paid a little more when you walk into a match that is billed as the Mask of Mil Mascaras versus the hair of Mike Masters. I'm sure a lot of people came in there. I don't think anybody was thinking Mil was going to lose his mask, but there's always that chance, right? And so that could have been interesting, but really they came to see the bad guy get his head shaved at the end of the day. So it's fun that they do these things for Mil. They give him these matches. We talked about it with Ron Starr and their back-to-back matches last summer. And now here in the spring, or going into the spring of 1981, we're seeing it again. Mil comes back through town and he's working a regular match. And then they somehow evolve that into the next show, which, you up the stakes with the gimmick match. And so that's fun that they do that with Mil. Even though he was a drawing attraction without the gimmick match, you add that to it, and I'm sure they made a few extra bucks.
That was frequent, when Mil came to town. Very often the program would be, he'd be there for, like, say, 3 straight Fridays in a row, and he would hit the little towns too. And, yeah, the way it would build up is he would get into a feud with one of the local heels, and it would work up to the hair versus mask or mask versus mask. I think it was always hair versus mask. I don't remember anybody's mask being on the line against Mil.
No Piel Blanco?
That's right. I think he would have been happy to drop that mask.
I forgot where Piel Blanco's build from, but that would have been interesting when he took off the hood. Yeah, that's just Mickey Doyle from Detroit.
Oh, God. Well, I remember seeing him debut the gimmick, and he wasn't in the ring 2 minutes where somebody started yelling.
Oh, well, he'd been there forever.
Mickey Doyle.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Every time they put a guy under a mask, they put Jack Armstrong under a mask as a super scorpion. Even the dimmest of the fans said, "Well, I think that's Jack Armstrong," and they were always right, except for the Monster. When the Monster debuted, they initially thought it was the Enforcer.
Oh, okay, all right. So they were fooled at least one. You can fool some of the people some of the time. So there you go. Yeah. But you just mentioned Wildman Jack Armstrong. Now that's a true enigma of a character if I ever saw one on the screen. I loved him even in Grunt the Wrestling Movie as the evil Russian commie warhead. What a name. And so I mark out whenever I see Jack Armstrong. He's a hell of a promo. I don't mean that he's going to put butts in the seats with those promos, but it's a entertaining time. And to me, and maybe I have to go back and watch his match. It's been a while, but he never really did anything wrong per se in the ring. So what was the reason? Because he had a good look, I thought too. Why was he never given a push?
When I was a little kid, when I was 10 years old, I kept on cheering for him and Rick Grayson to win. You have these 2 stunningly handsome guys. And Rick Grayson wasn't in my opinion, nearly as good as Jack Armstrong. But, Jack Armstrong, have I talked in past episodes about my friendship with Jack Armstrong? Have I touched on that at all?
I kind of feel like maybe we mentioned Jack on the first episode, but I don't remember anything deep, going into anything deep.
My dear friend Dan Farron has told me I should have a pen with me and just take notes of what I talk about.
The real Dan Farron, not to be confused with the masked Dan Farron on WWF TV from 1993. It's a joke, guys. You got to Google it.
Augie lawyer. Yes.
My.
So I met Jack Armstrong on the night of my very first wrestling match in Bell, California, and it was in a little boxing gym.
Okay.
And I used to call this character who had a wrestling hotline in the 70s named Captain Lenny in New York City. And Captain Lenny was out there. And he wasn't somebody you went if you wanted really good, solid information on the business, but he was just a trip to talk with. And I remember he said, you know who I grew up with? Jack Armstrong. Wildman and Jack Armstrong grew up in my neighborhood. And I was like, yeah, right, Lenny, yeah, right. So I remember the main event on the night of my first match was Billy Anderson and Jack Armstrong. After the match, Jack Armstrong is, sitting down all sweaty, unlacing his boots. And I wanted to meet him anyway. I always loved Jack Armstrong. And I'm super nervous. I'm like, Mr. Armstrong, you grew up in New York City, yeah? And he goes, yeah, and he mentioned the neighborhood. And I said, do you remember a guy by the name of Lenny Dauber? And right as he's unlacing his boots, he just freezes as if somebody took a picture. And he just froze for about 3 seconds. And then he just looks up at me with this big grin and just says, you sick motherfucker, how do you know Captain Lenny? Why do you know Captain Lenny Dauber? And so from then on, last time I talked to him was about 2 months ago. And the first thing we do is we greet each other with a, hey, how's it going? How's my fellow member of the Lenny Dauber fan club?
Nice.
I'll tell you this, Jack Armstrong, man, I wish he were my next door neighbor, because if you're having a bad day, just go visit Jack Armstrong and you'll be the happiest cat on the planet by the time you're done. He's not just a really upbeat character and not just a kind character, but I'll go as far as saying one of the kindest people I've ever met.
Okay.
Very wonderful person. And, well, one of the reasons he didn't get a push is a lot of the times he wasn't working full-time in the biz. He got a brief push in Ann Gunkel's promotion, and when he was wrestling for the Deucix, they pushed him under a Sheik-like gimmick as Ollie Ben Khan.
Oh, right, yeah.
And in fact, I remember one year at Cauliflower Alley, I didn't know Jack was going to be there. I come in the room, and I hear Ox Baker scream as he walks in, Ollie Ben Khan! And I look over, and there's Jack. But Jack was a good worker, but he is somebody who really, he didn't care if you were going to job him out or put him on top. I remember that first year when I was wrestling on the indie shows, Pistol Pete and Carl Lauer were booking the show I was working, and Jack, I was very flattered. Jack Armstrong actually requested that I be his opponent. I was, which is funny thinking back because I'm like half his size. It really shows. But before Jack came, Pete was saying, okay, we're going to pull a rib on Jack. When we come in, we're going to say, Kurt's going to go over clean. And I just want to see the expression on his face. And so Jack Armstrong walks in with that $1 million smile and, hey, how's everybody doing? And, he tells me, Kurt, looking forward to working with you tonight. And then Pete says, okay, Jack. And, I remember Budokan was there too. And he and Pete are looking at each other and says, so this is our plan. We're going to put Kurt over clean tonight. And it says, are you okay with that? And Jack just says, yeah, let's do it. Yeah. And then he's like, yeah, so what else is up, guys? And they look at each other and they say, Jack, we're putting Kurt over clean. And goes, okay. And they say, we got you, didn't we, Jack?
Wow.
It's a rib. And Jack smiles and says, oh, okay, well, but if you want me to put him over, I will. And of course he went over. But yeah. And one of the most recent times I talked to him, we were talking about an old friend, Stefan De Leon, who some people might remember as enhancement talent.
Just watched Dino Bravo squash him this week when I was doing my other show. So.
Yes. he and Ricky Ataki were like best of friends, and two other really, really nice guys. Well, sadly, Stefan was killed in a motorcycle wreck in 2004, but when Jack and I were talking recently, he talked about wrestling Stefan on a show, on one of Herb Abrams' shows. Oh, okay. And it was initially going to be just a squash match. And as they're talking in the dressing room, Stefan just mentioned, not in a, can you make me look good? But he said, oh, my mom's in the audience here.
I gotcha.
And Jack just said, oh, is she really? And so he said what he did is he pretty much gave Stefan the match. And then when he went over Stefan, he did like with the feet on the ropes. But he said his mom was there, and it's like, who's going to remember the match in another year? And so he wanted to make the guy look good in front of his mom. He's just a fun guy to be around. I cannot say enough nice things about him.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I was always a fan. I like the underdog guys, but he was one of the fun ones. He had a great look about him, and yeah, it was always fun. And then when I saw him in the Grunt movie and the silliness with the character there, so
yeah. Even though I have a lot of friends who were in that movie, I was only able to get through that once. The one time was enough. He's in his 80s. He's had he said he's had over 20 surgeries on his back and shoulders. And has had knee replacements, but you would never guess it when you talk to him. He just sounds like the happiest cat on the planet. That's just awesome. Sounds like a guy who loves life, and couldn't happen to a nicer person. And he's good financially and everything, and that always puts a smile on my face as one of the nice guys.
Well, I'm glad I asked about him.
Wound up in a good place.
I'm glad I asked about him. He's one of those guys I always wondered what happened with him. So I appreciate you giving us an update on Jack Armstrong there. That was good stuff. Thanks for sharing the stories, man.
Mil Mascaras apparently loved hanging around him because Jack is another, like Mike Masters, Jack just has to put on the smile and just talk, and women flock to him. He never had to put effort into it. So Mascaras liked to hang with him for that reason. And Jack loved working with Mil Mascaras. He said if it was TV, it would be a quick 5-minute match, but he said one of the things he liked about working with Mascaras in the spot shows or towns where there was no TV was Mascaras loved to work long matches. And Jack did too. Jack was a cardio freak. So he said Mascaras would wrestle him for like 20, 25 minutes before he went over, where a lot of people, Mascaras would just say 10, 15 minutes, somewhere around there.
Well, that's a cool deal, man. And, you could always tell Jack was a cardio guy. You can always tell the cardio guys, especially back in the day, because they were constantly moving around the ring before the match even started. They just wanted to get things going, get the body flowing. You could always tell the difference, because most of the guys, especially back in that era, they weren't going to move any more than they had to before that bell rang. So, but Jack was always like up on the middle turnbuckle, running around the ring and whatnot. So, yeah. Definitely a cardio guy.
You could just see the energy in him. He practically lit up the room with his energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Rasslin Podcast, where we talk the territories. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Rasslin Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Rasslin Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Rasslin Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, Videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/WrestlePod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, wherever you go, whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
All right, so we're going to get into a really fun name here in just a moment. He's on the other side of this question, so you may or may not have recollection of this, Vandal. I'm just going to pick your brain and see what comes out of it from your side. And then this is definitely a question I'm going to send over to Jeff Walton as well. But this is actually a comment made by Jeff in Rock Rim's book. And I took out an actual excerpt here of 2 or 3 sentences. It says, Jeff said, as things were starting to decline, the Spanish International Network told Mike LeBell that they wanted a 90-minute show instead of a 60-minute show. Walton goes on to say that VTV, who was doing the tapings, was extending themselves to Guam, Puerto Rico, South America, and Mexico. Mike LeBell saw dollar signs in doing the TV tapes, and he decided that he'd only have 2 matches on every show. Jeff says, can you imagine that? Only 2 matches on a 90-minute TV show.
My God.
Do you remember any of this?
Yes. Now, I don't remember the situation with the TV specifically.
Okay.
I do remember for a while around late 70s, early 80s, where they had some unusually long matches, and that might be vaguely answering your question. Walton would definitely know that. I'm curious now.
Yeah, well, I mean, he spoke about it briefly here in the story, in the Rock Rims book. So I that's definitely something I'll pick his brain on. I see what he's talking about in regards to, well, hell, we're going to make more money if we put this out here into these other countries and things of that nature. And they want to extend the show, that's fine. Maybe it makes a few more extra bucks on that too. But it's kind of weird that, again, 90-minute show, 2 matches. I mean, you're going to stretch 2 matches to, I don't know, man. I wouldn't capture my attention for very long based on some of the guys they have coming through. Yeah, and to do it every week.
Oh, yeah.
That's crazy.
I had never heard that. And I remember there was a stretch. I remember it was when Tom Ernesto was promoting, and this wasn't TV. But I remember there were some times where some of the opening matches with guys who weren't bad workers but weren't great either would wrestle these incredibly long matches that they just weren't cut out for. Somebody told me, and I have no idea if this is true, but one person said that they heard Ernesto thought fans loved long matches. And, I'm not certain what Ernesto's deal was in Los Angeles because he booked other territories with a lot of success. I can't tell you I know about it in detail, but I heard he did well in Puerto Rico and Memphis. And,
I'm watching that Memphis right now. I don't know about that one.
Not so much?
Not so much. Not at the moment. We'll see. I'll wait and see if he turns it around. Now, Jeff Walton going to follow him in there as a manager. Tux Newman, we talked about Tux, the character, and your manager for one night as well. So, but even for Memphis, there's a lot of weird shit going on right now in Memphis 85 that we're covering. So it's
I might have to take that back what I said then. Well, I'm curious now because I know he booked some territories that people said.
And he worked with Ann Gunkel.
He was good in the role.
Yeah. And he worked in the Georgia War. So they were successful, but, times changed, and I don't know that Ernesto changed with the times. It's kind of like the George Scott deal, right? George Scott comes in and basically does a terrible job with the WCW. He doesn't last very long, but it's long enough anyway. I'll
never forget, I thought it was a bad sign when I heard that one of the first things he wanted to do was get rid of the Fantastics. And I think Midnight Express, get rid of the Driftwood. And I'm saying that's not a good sign.
That's insane. Absolutely. And I do remember the Fantastics leaving for a brief period there when he was in. So that would explain that. I had never heard that. I knew the Fantastics or the Midnight Steel before, but
because don't you know only big men draw?
Right.
People only want to see big men. Yeah. When I went to a wrestling show, first thing I asked, are they big?
Are they big? The bigger the better, pal. It's like Vince McMahon mentality.
Well, I'm not going then.
No wonder he had George Scott working for him in New York there in their mid-'80s for a little while there, Vince. He likes the big guys, so it made more sense.
That's right.
Yeah, there you go. All right, well, it's that time. We've been waiting. We're 3 shows in, and we're halfway through this one, or maybe more than halfway through it. And the time has come, guys, and everybody's been waiting with bated breath. At this point in time, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to listen to the story of the monster, Vandal.
I remember the first night the night they debuted the monster. It was in summer of '81, and my friend Lloyd and I knew it was coming. I believe it was one of the office people, a guy named Tom Abdu, told Lloyd that they were going to put Hot Stuff Hernandez in a Frankenstein outfit. And when we heard that, we said, okay, we got to be there. We have to go see this.
So you got the lowdown early.
Yes. There were a few people in the office who would, I later learned a lot of offices had people like this. They would do kayfabe, but they would leak it to a few people to look cool.
Okay.
And Abdul was one of those guys. He wouldn't tell everybody, but he'd tell a few people to look cool. Give him the lowdown. And I remember it really well. His opponent that night was Salvador Belomo. And Belomo is in the ring. And before they make the introductions, Jeff Walton walks down the aisle in the San Bernardino Arena. And he says something like, fans, I just saw something. I don't know what I saw. I don't know if this is human or what this is, but I ask you, I want you all to stay in your seats and please don't get close to him. And that's something that might have worked maybe 20 years early and probably only in certain territories, but the fans were all already kind of like looking at each other like, what? So out comes the monster in chains. Goliath is leading him to the ring.
Okay.
And they had Goliath be his manager. And the storyline was that the manager, Pete Collins, built him in a laboratory. And this was his creation.
Wow.
And eventually, when I say eventually, I mean a couple months into it, the monster actually got a good pop, I will say that. But that first night, people are just laughing and booing and just saying, oh my God, this is ridiculous. And they're saying, take off the mask, Enforcer. And
wow. Well, he was
coming to the ring.
I assume he moved very stiffly if they thought it was the Enforcer.
I have to say, the monster was a better worker than the Enforcer, a lot more believable, too. Yeah, him being built in the laboratory was a lot more believable than Enforcer Luciano being a wrestler.
So you said later on he's going to get some pops, the monster character. Do you think that was because the fans at that point, they were in on the joke then? They were like, okay.
He wasn't box office, but I do remember because that was the first time I was actually friends with some of the wrestlers in Tim Flowers and Bobby Lane. Who was Bobby Pico Jr. Now, what I remember, because a couple of times since I was just a lazy cat who had nothing better to do than sit around and get high and go on road trips with my wrestling friends. So as time went on, I'd see that people, when they talk, they say, yeah, it is a stupid gimmick and stuff like that. But they did kind of get into it. They just kind of went along with the show. And they figured out I can't remember how long it took before they figured out that it was Tony Hernandez. And so they would boo him. He never got heat where people were either scared of him or enraged that he was, hurting the baby faces.
Right.
In fact, I remember, because what they eventually did was they turned the monster baby face.
Right.
And his two handlers, one was Goliath, who, like I said, would lead him to the ring in chains. And it seemed like they had him with Goliath because I think Hernandez, he was like a local Arizona boy. I just recently read he was trained by the woman wrestler Toma, I think her name was, from the Billy Wolf era. But I think he stayed kind of green and stiff. Wasn't terrible to watch, but wasn't a great worker either. So I think Goliath was kind of his guide, kind of like would be in his corner. As silly as a gimmick it is, you're trying to get it over. And, the greener you are, the less effective it's going to look. And I think Goliath kind of guided him getting over. So what they eventually did is typical LeBell type of stuff. They put into the storyline that the monster is being abused by Pete Collins and Goliath, that they're mean to him. They don't feed him adequately.
He eats? The monster eats.
I know. That's the thing. I guess even when you build something synthetic, it needs its fruits, its vegetables, its proteins.
Okay. All right. I learned something new every day.
Yeah. So when you turn on your computer, give it a nice little kiss, polish it up a bit and feed it well.
Yeah.
So they did a gimmick where Tom Ernesto learned how to tame the monster with a flashlight. Oh God, this I remember well. They would do, when he turned babyface, the monster would be with Tom Ernesto, and Tom Ernesto would say, I've grown very fond of this fella here, and he's been mistreated. And the monster would kind of like brush dust off his suit and pat him like a pup with his owner.
Where's this footage? I need to see this shit.
I know. It was in the era where not everybody had a VCR, but there were enough of them.
Especially in a big city like LA.
Yes. Well, there was a guy who posted
on YouTube
a lot of stuff from that area. He had a nickname like Jelly Beans or something like that, but he had a lot of stuff in LA, including a match with the Monster versus Mario Valenzuela. And one of the other things that I wish at the time I didn't know how to like download something from YouTube, but I thought it would be there for a while, but he had some Olympic auditorium matches from a different promotion, one of the local lucha promotions where all our local boys of that era were shown. A couple of those still exist, but not many. And the reason we can't find them now is I guess tons of people went to that guy asking to buy DVDs from him. And he said, no, I'm just putting them on YouTube. That's it. And I guess people were relentless. So he just put down his account. Tapes were never seen again, sadly.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. I remember watching that video of the monster way back when it was up. It's been a long time ago now. It was posted on Kayfabe Memories in the board as well, if I remember correctly. That might have been where I found the link to it. But yeah, like you, I just figured it was
going to... Is that the one where they have like some metal music in the background?
That's the new version. Yeah, that's the one they added later. Yeah, that's... no, I actually saw the... I saw the original match that was up there years ago. And, like you, I figured it would just be up there forever. And then one day it was gone. And I go, oh, my God, I can't believe I didn't get that while it was up there. So it's unfortunate. Hopefully, maybe someday.
It probably was really easy to download. I think it was like 12, 13 years ago, something like that.
It's been a while, yeah.
I want to cry.
So the monster comes in as a heel.
Anyways.
He's managed technically by Pete Collins, or created by Pete Collins, but he's handled by the Great Goliath during these matches. There's actually the footage you're talking about, the music video, if you want to call it. We see Goliath technically in the ring with the monster while he's trying to wrestle at points, because he's trying to control him while he's beating the crap out of, what was it, Mario Valenzuela?
Yes.
Okay.
There was one really cool match of his, and if I'm recalling correctly, and I think I am, for whatever reason, they didn't tape it for television. It was just a match when they were running at the sports arena. Mm-hmm. And my friend Lloyd and I see Tim Talltree, sitting in the seats, and he's wearing something Talltree didn't. Usually Talltree had, like, I don't know, an AC/DC t-shirt on or something like that.
Sure.
But he had, like, one of those old Levi denim jackets people used to wear. A denim hat and denim jeans, light blue. And we figured, well, this is not exactly Tim Talltree attire. Like, I guess he's doing an angle. And sure enough, the monster comes out, and Pete Collins issues a challenge. If anybody can last 10 minutes with the monster, because at this point he was squashing everybody in 2 to 3 minutes.
Right.
He says, we'll give him $500. And so Talltree just stands up with $500. I'm in. And he gets in there, and he goes after the monster, and the monster squashes him. And when he squashes him, Talltree digs himself and he's bleeding from head to toe. I'm talking a Paraguayo bleeding.
Wow.
He's just soaked in his own crimson. And this was at the point where my buddy and I were still just laughing at this gimmick. But I remember I'm looking at it, and I didn't say anything myself, but I thought, oh my God, this is actually really cool. And I didn't want to look silly. I didn't say anything, but my friend Lloyd just said, Kurt, this is too hep. This is too hep. This is great. And I just said, oh, and I just said, you know what? You're right. It is. And to be honest, in hindsight, I loved the monster. I thought it was very silly at the time.
Right.
And I actually remember talking with Jeff Walton. God, this must have been about 30 years back, but he said something like, it's funny, a lot of you guys love stuff like Titanes in El Ring, but you didn't like the monster. And, I see his point, but I think the difference is Titanes in El Ring was an array of just exotic, out there gimmicks.
Right, the entire promotion.
It was a psychedelic wonderland.
Right.
And it was a hard sell, though, for traditional wrestling fans to say this monster was created in the laboratory. In fact, a few years after that was the Mummy's main opponent in Argentina was the android, who also was built in the laboratory. And the annual Luna Park show, when Martin Cardagian was getting too old to wrestle the Mummy each year, that was like an annual thing in Buenos Aires. So they had the Mummy versus the android, with the professor, utilizing his little computer and everything. The coolest part about that was the Mummy's son was in his corner. There was a little tiny mummy, who was, I guess, the 10-year-old son of El Ancho Pucelle, one of the top baby faces there. It was so cool to see the Mummy's son, there to cheer on his father.
Yeah.
The Mummy's son tried to get in the ring when his dad was being wronged by the robot, and the Mummy told us, push his son back into the corner, like, no, let Daddy fight his fight.
Oh, how fun, man. Yeah, I could see what your point of view was, and that would have been mine too, I think, in this instance. It's a lot easier to suspend your disbelief and enjoy Titanes for what it was when the entire promotion is that, versus we're trying to have a legitimate pro wrestling, if that's such a thing, promotion here in LA with a monster now involved. But so he was created in a laboratory.
Exactly.
He comes out as a heel.
Titanis in the ring never claimed to be real wrestling.
Right.
In fact, you could see the 1973 movie on YouTube, and it was filmed right around the time they had their first really huge show in Luna Park, the first really famous meeting of Martine versus the Mummy.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the opening scenes in the movie is they show all the wrestlers in the gym working out their spots for the upcoming Luna Park show in Buenos Aires. So they never said, hey, what you're seeing is real. And I'm certain it must have, because I remember there were a couple of no-shows, people coming through from Japan. A lot of guys, when they were winding up their tour in Japan, before they went home, they'd stop off in L.A. and work a LeBell show.
Right.
And I think it was Stan Lane was supposed to wrestle the Monster. He no-showed that one.
Wow. Good call, Stan.
And somebody else, was it? I can't remember if it was Dynamite Kid or somebody, but...
Wow, now that would have been very interesting. Dynamite Kid and the Monster.
God, can you imagine? Talk about a styles clash.
Yeah.
No, the most famous Monster match, though, was when he wrestled Andre the Giant.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something I'd love to hear Jeff Walton talk about this. I wonder how well he remembers that evening. It was a very eventful evening because Andre was in wild form that night.
Mm.
What I'll remember is before the match, I see Tim Flowers standing outside the dressing room. This was when Tim Flowers was one of the main eventers. But here he is in the sports arena, and he's standing there in his trunks and a T-shirt. And it's like during the first couple of matches, and he's just standing there. And I'm saying, Tim, why aren't you in the dressing room? And he says, Andre kicked me out. I'm going, what? Tim Flowers was like one of the most talented workers I've ever seen, but how do I put it? He wasn't very tactful with people, and I guess he was trying to buddy up with Andre. I guess Andre was really I guess he was just chugging bottles of wine like crazy, and Tim Flowers is, he's a rookie, he's new, and he's trying to act like he's like this veteran buddy and says, Andre, you fucking wino, look at you drink. And Andre, I didn't see this part, but a friend of mine just saw Tim Flowers get airborne, tossed out of the dressing room.
Wow.
And he had to stay there until, God, what was his match? Oh, he wrestled Hacksaw Duggan that night, I remember.
Oh, Duggan. Yeah, that's right, Duggan came through there.
Yes. And so when Andre wrestles the Monster, the storyline was the Monster was finally going to meet his match, and
right.
it initially looked kind of cool because Andre just is in the ring staring at the Monster, and the Monster looks at him and kind of looks him up and down like, oh my God, I've never seen a creature like this. Like, this guy's bigger than me. And Andre didn't work with him. Andre just like smacked the crap out of him, broke a couple of his ribs, which was fucked up. I don't know what Tony Hernandez was like. I'm sure Andre was just drinking heavily and probably thought the gimmick was stupid. I don't know.
Right, and he took it out on the guy underneath the mask.
That's very messy. Yeah, it was very messed up. And it was a lumberjack match. And I can't remember the exact story, but there was some sort of harness that the Monster wore to keep his mask intact. It wasn't just like a rubber mask he pulled off.
Oh, okay.
There was actually some harness to make it steady, and he had the big jacket over it. Well, when Andre was shooting on him, I guess that the harness came loose, and the Monster had to get back to the dressing room because I heard a lot of people say he unmasked the Monster, which is not true. The Monster never lost the match to the best of my ability. That's
what I've heard. I've heard that in stories told as well, that Andre took his mask off, which is, a fun way to tell the story. At the end of the day, it's a fishtail to a degree, I guess, when you're talking about Andre in the ring with the Monster.
Exactly. To the best of my memory, I saw no face other than Frankenstein's.
Okay, very fair. That's fair.
It was awkward because it was a lumberjack match, and Tony Hernandez just wanted to get the fuck back to the dressing room. He was being hurt. His costume was falling apart. And so as he's going back, all these guys from Tim Flowers to Hacksaw Duggan, everybody is trying to drag him back to the ring, and he's actually shoving him. And to Hacksaw Duggan's credit, he actually bumped for him. Every time he tried to get the monster back, him and Tim Flowers, they both bumped for him very generously. And
he was having none of it, though. He went straight to the locker room.
That was it, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And then next thing you know, they turn him babyface, and they just act like they, of course, they said Andre defeated the monster, and that's when the babyface turn came about. And one of the matches I didn't attend, I really wish I did in hindsight, was when they showed that he was a nice, kind monster after all. Around Halloween, they had Monster Camera Night, where with your admission, your little kids can get their picture taken with the monster. So,
wow. Okay.
If there's anybody out there in their 40s
oh my God.
or 50s who has a picture of themselves as a kid in the monster's lap, oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I'd probably pay you some good money for a copy of that photo.
Let's see that photo, guys. Yeah, absolutely, man. I'd love to check that out. So basically what I got out of this storyline with the Andre deal was, I guess the monster won a battle royal. And by winning the battle royal, he received a shot against Andre the Giant back in September here of 81. And that turns out to be a lumberjack match, like you said. And the same information you have, you gave us is basically what I was able to find, although you gave us a little more detail, which is fun. But basically, it was that Andre beat the living shit out of poor Mr. Hernandez, and finally the monster decides I'm getting the hell out of Dodge before this guy does more than break my ribs or injure my ribs. And so he rolls out of the ring. The other lumberjack thinks it's part of the match, and they try to stop him, bring him back like a lumberjack match or like a lumberjack should do. But he says, "No, I'm not doing this." And again, like you hypothesized, I do believe it was on combination of Andre drinking and not caring too much for this ridiculous matchup that he's been put in with basically, for those of you who don't know what the monster was, it was Frankenstein's monster is what it was. It was the mask. It was the gear for the most part. It had the foot lifts, everything. It was the whole 9 yards. And I could see Andre half drunk or maybe all the way drunk standing across the ring going, "What the fuck is this shit, boss?" And basically it was on from there, unfortunately.
About 12 or 13 years ago, Dan Farron did a podcast. He did just a series of 3 or 4 interviews about the LA territory.
Mm-hmm.
Had a really good interview with Johnny Legend. It's not just Johnny Legend's usual being silly. He actually talks about being Ricky Starr and Blassie back in the day, and was very serious. It's a gem of an episode. The other episode is with Jeff Walton, and when he did that, he gave me a heads up and, said, if you want to call in and be part of it. And I did. And I asked Jeff who came up with the monster, and Jeff said that was my idea. And he said I was a huge fan of Universal horror, and it's something he wanted to try. And I give him props. I'm not going to say at the time I thought, oh, this is awesome. No, I thought it was like the stupidest thing. But there were some points, like I said, the Tim Talltree thing. Why they didn't televise that, I don't know. That would have been sweet, especially if they still had the TV studio. It would look so good in the TV studio. In hindsight, I have very fond memories of the monster, and I give it to Walton for giving it a shot. I'm certain almost everybody would have said this is going to go over like a lead brick, but we're talking about it now, so it has a legacy.
I was going to say almost 45 years later, we're still talking about it. So, I mean, absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? You don't know what you got till it's gone.
You're so true.
And we lost the monster so many years ago. And you didn't know it was happening, but before our eyes, by the end of 1981, the wheels fall off. I guess, they rode the monster character for as long as they could. Debuts in July, gone by the end of the year. So about almost a 6-month run there with the character. And that's the story of the monster.
Early in 82, he was around for a very short time in early 82.
Okay.
What they did is they came up with another character called Bigfoot. And I can't remember what the costume was, but it was another monster costume, and it was Salvador Lothario, brother of Jose, under that mask. And he even had a match with the Sheik.
Wow.
And I was told, I didn't see this, I was told at San Bernardino Arena, and again, I don't know if this is one of those stories of somebody, kind of enhancing the truth.
Sure.
But somebody said that the Sheik actually squirted lighter fluid on the costume, and they actually set the monster on fire briefly. And I was told it looked cool. I don't know if that was an accurate recounting, though. I think that was one of the last times the Sheik was in L.A. also, before his big falling out with LeBell.
Right. Well, Sheik would have a lot of fallings out here in the early 1980s. That's for sure. So
one of the few times where LeBell was the one to say, "Get out of my yard." You're not welcome here anymore.
Yeah. Interesting story to follow, the Sheik and some of the things that went on with him. But, man, just as equally interesting as everything we've covered here today, the monster, man, I'm so happy we spent some time on it. It's been coming. Couple episodes in the making, and here it is, and literally in the making, because it took me a while to build them in my laboratory down here in the basement. But I was happy to get your recollections of him, the monster character coming out here, and man, making some waves as a heel, and then turning babyface because he saw the light, literally the flashlight of Tom Ernesto. And it's a fun little story, man. Fun little story in wrestling history, right? Even if Dave Meltzer gave it the most disgusting promotional tactic of 1981, I say in hindsight, at the very least, that it was a fun ride back in time.
I agree, and I bet you I was one of those people who said it, who voted for it being the most disgusting. But I take back my vote. Okay. I was wrong. I was so wrong.
You hear that, Dave? You might have to retract.
It was a fun time.
A couple of the votes at the very least. So.
And Jelly Beans, if you're out there,
oh my God,
please put the videos back on YouTube. I promise I'll make certain that everybody behaves.
Yes, absolutely, man. Just share that wrestling history, man. Don't let it get lost to time. I totally agree with that. So next time around, we're going to talk about some of the, I won't call them outlaw promotions, especially here by the early 1980s, but some of the other promotions that are popping up and some of the other promoters popping up, including Six Amigos Incorporated. Anton Leone is running some shows here around this time frame.
I look forward to talking about that. I will get really prepared. We used to make the trek out to Bakersfield for the Leone shows because those were really good shows, especially when Ron Starr was booking.
I heard they had some quality stuff going on there in those. I guess LeBell considered them competition, so we'll get into that. We'll get into a whole lot more, guys, next time around. There's still plenty of talent coming through here that we haven't hit on. I'm looking at a list. I'm looking at results. I don't know that we're any specific time frame. We've kind of cleared through 1981 for the most part. I'll go back, maybe tackle a couple of the angles or storylines that took place over that year, but we're kind of moving into the home stretch in another couple episodes, and we may be seeing the demise.
82 is a good year to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, because there were some bright spots in 1982, despite the fact that it was going downhill and going downhill hard. But it's kind of crazy you say that, Vandal, because that happens a lot. It's like the dying days of WCW. They had all the new talent coming in, the young guys that might have been able to do something if they had had more time. Yeah.
The dying days of ECW. A lot of the younger guys are starting to come in and making a name for themselves, like the Easy Money and guys like that. And then that goes away. And so it's kind of funny. We see that here in LA, like you pointed out, in 1982. It's starting to turn around, maybe not financially, but the talent was there to maybe do something with it, but it was just a little too late. They didn't have the TV. And again, they burned bridges, promised matches, didn't deliver, and weren't paying anybody. So it was hard to get a lot of the other guys to come in. So there's a lot of things. We'll get into it when we get into it.
That'd be a very interesting article or book, even. If you looked at the history of territories going the way of the dinosaur and the new kid coming into town, it's in Rock Rim's book on Roy Shire. It's like history repeating itself, and Roy Shire taking the territory from Joe Makowitz,
right?
Because Makowitz didn't think TV would be important, was a waste of money. Where the young gun Roy Shire says this is necessary, and he was right. Makowitz went out of business pretty quickly. But then Roy Shire also didn't keep up with the times and wasn't behaving himself and a number of other things when he got older. It'd be interesting to do an analogy of all the different territories and see how many promotion falls were the result of promotion falls. I've been using some awkward wording tonight. I do apologize, everybody. I'm much better when I write things down than when I talk.
Well, we spent more than 20 minutes on the monsters, so I don't think anybody's paying attention to your wording when we're discussing monsters in the ring and whatnot. But yeah, go ahead, man. Continue on.
This is true. This is true, but it'd be interesting to see if that's the typical story of all the different promotions over the years since pro wrestling was a thing. At least regional and the big promotions.
Right.
I mean, AAA was just sold.
Right? Wow, that came out of nowhere, man.
I'm rarely surprised, but that surprised me. And while I cannot give you my own opinion on AAA, I haven't watched it in a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
I heard a lot of people said that it's down in quality. I don't know what their business was like, but I'm wondering if it's another one of those examples of somebody just wanting to unload it, or their time's running. I don't know what the story is, and I'm really eager to read up on that.
Yeah, really interesting to see what they're going to do with that.
I know it's interesting, and it's interesting just to see how wrestling really does seem like one of these industries where the kingpin is often somebody who just thinks this method of promoting and media is going to keep going forever, and you don't keep up with
the times, technology,
what the new technology is.
Yeah,
exactly.
We got so much to get into still, including literally the dying days of the LA territory. We'll talk about all of the final cards, the deal that Mike LeBell made with Vince McMahon. Yes, that Vince McMahon. Well, him and his father at that point in time, but it starts all the way back here, guys. And so we'll get into it, though. We got a lot still to cover over the next couple episodes. So, Vandal, can't wait to have you back again and continue on this road.
Thank you. I want to say I've enjoyed every episode I've done with you, and I look forward to the future episodes, too. I really enjoy my time on here, so thank you.
Absolutely. We love having you. We'll have him back soon, guys. Vandal Drummond, once again, more on the LA territory here in the early 1980s, and just a few more weeks as part of the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories.
Stay hep, you groovy cats. See you soon.